You know, we need to clarify something. We investigate Van Halen religiously, but Van Halen 1 was done on that board, which was a Bushnell.
Yep.
No other Van Halen was done on a Bushnell. Everyone thinks that there was a Bushnell in Studio 2 here at Sunset Sound. That is not true. Every publication writes that. What records or what console was done in Studio 2, and what did Van Halen do? Van Halen 2, Women and Children, Fair Warning, Diver Down. That would have been...
So that was a custom API console. So after the success of the Studio 1 console, the Bushnell console, the Sound Techniques, I think, was having some issues of part problems. That's what I remember. We had the talk, I think I remember, was that they couldn't get certain parts. It was because it had to come from England, and consoles need maintenance. So my father...
Yeah, in those days, you didn't have FedEx.
No, yeah, exactly. It was a boat.
U.S. mail.
Yeah, not even necessarily a plane. So my father made the decision, let's get another API-based console, but a custom console. So Bushnell, I believe, was out of business by then. So I think he hired, this is where it's a little murky, but I think he hired some of the people from Bushnell. I think Dean Jensen was one of them, and there were a couple other guys. And anyway, we ended up building the console across the street at Crossroads of the World. And so it started out as being built by someone else, which I can't remember, but then we took it over. And so it was basically a Sunset Sound built console that we hired people to build.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And it was very similar to the Studio 1 console and the Studio 3 console.
And then you had the Studio 1 console, you expanded it, and that's when DeMedio...
That's when DeMedio came in. That was originally a 24-channel board, and that was just too small at the time, or it became too small. So we needed to expand it to 32 tracks, which Frank did that. And I think that was our first association with Frank. And then when we built Studio 3, we went back to Frank, and we said, we want you to build a console for us, because we were happy with his work.
And he was actually finishing things.
Yes, very admirable guy.
No, I really liked Frank a lot.
Yes.
He used to buy a lot of EQs from me.
We want him to come in. Brian Key, who's been trying to get me to get a hold of him. I think his granddaughter emails us sometimes.
Yeah, you might have to go out there, but I would definitely do that.
Yeah, he's got to be in his 90s now.
He is one of those guys that you want to get on tape, because I mean that was the problem with Les Paul. He would tell great stories when you were one-on-one with him. And I went up to visit him at his house, and the things that he said were just unbelievable. But if you put a camera on him, he would soften him a lot, because he didn't want to offend anybody.
Sure.
Yeah. But he was an unfiltered guy and one-to-one, and I just loved him. And Frank is the same way. And Frank is, I think Frank's from the East Coast.
He's from Cuba. He's a Cuban.
Cuban, right? Because he has this kind of like what a bunch of fucking dumbasses, But just a knowledgeable guy, great guy, knew how to do everything, and big, huge Formica panels, engraved Formica panels, and
that's right,
stuff like that. And yeah, he was good. He built a console for Prince.
Whoa, DeMedio?
Yeah.
Oh, because he wanted to mimic.
When he
yeah,
mimicked Studio 3.
Right, but the funny thing is that, and anybody who ever worked with those guys, Prince was just a pain in the fucking ass. I mean, he's, however nice he was, great songs and stuff like that, but he could be a real
perfectionist,
pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Well, perfectionist is except that he fucked himself many times, being so perfectionist that he would forget elements. So it got to the point where Frank said, all right, look, you tell me exactly what you want, and that's exactly what I'm going to build, period. And they went, okay, fine. And they listed everything. So the console shows up, and they're put tracks up on it, stuff like that, and they're running, and it might have even been Susan, might have been the one.
Susan Rogers.
Yeah, that discovered the fact that it had no solo bus because he didn't ask for one.
Oh, God.
And it was like, you said
that's cool
to do exactly what I tell you to do.
Yeah, no recommendations.
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
And so they had to go put a solo bus in. And that was kind of one of those kind of things. And that's the way Frank was. It's like, you want to be a dick? Okay. You tell me what you want, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
You got it.
Wow.
And you get a console without a frame because he didn't ask for a frame.
But he was Studio B at Paisley Park is a replica of Studio 3 here at Sunset Sound.
Ish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they hired some of the same people. They remember
Yeah.
they're measuring the room and the height.
Peggy
all
was
this
involved in
stuff.
that too.
Yeah.
Do you think it could be the songs that did well? I mean,
Yeah, I mean-
I'm just saying, I'm throwing that out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as a plus for us, it's a great thing that there is that witchcraft that goes along with it, because then you can always say, oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, Brent Averill tried to destroy everybody because it was like, oh yeah, the op amps are different. Don't use those op amps. And it turned out to be the transformers that were really different, because API had like 7 different op amps. It was a good op amp, and there were many versions of it, but it was just a good op amp. That's it.
Yeah.
But the transformer changed dramatically, and that's what made the difference in the sound in those days. And that's why you guys put that little snuffer circuit on the output of the transformers to kind of calm down that ring that it had. And we discovered that when I owned API. We discovered that, and we turned that into, we figured out what it was and then corrected it, and basically in like 96 got back the original sound back in the transformers.
Right.
It took me 10 years to figure out what it was, because it was never written down anywhere. It was one of those kind of things where you order something from a company, you say, we want this many windings on this type of core, we want these colors coming out, and we want the holes to mount it in this position, and blah, blah, blah. And they do. You don't specify how you want, you tell them how you want the windings done, but they're going to wind it themselves. And they used a certain type of wire that they always used that was never in a spec. And so when we went back to have the transformers made, they made them with what they had now instead of what they had then, because it was never specified. Again, we'll make it exactly the way you say it. And so that's what it was. And they had made, the transformers were slightly different in the way they were wound. So we finally figured out a way to simulate the way it used to be, because that old technology was no longer available. So we had to figure out a new way to do it, and we did. And that's how they're made now, and that's one of the reasons why there's people that offer transformers with the Litz windings or not the Litz windings, because the Litz winding thing is why it works. Litz wire is the why the wire is twisted in your extension cord, is because it allows the cable to have some bendability and strength and stuff like that. We found that insulated Litz wire works really well to make transformers, and so there's a lot of people that are doing that now because they all kind of discovered it. But there was a big thing in the 80s, in the late 70s actually, there was a big thing where a lot of the audio transformers in the world changed because these companies that made this certain type of wire just kind of went away. Because when solid state came out, the transformers and the tubes and stuff kind of faded for a while until they came back. But at that point, a lot of those companies went bust because they weren't making the quantities.